and didn't get it until I started using these. They refer to them as fleshing adzes, and if you know what an adze is, you're fixing to find out why. I'm not going to flesh this whole hide in this video. There's certain areas of the hide that flesh a lot different than other areas. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to start those areas and do, to, at least in my mind, enough of that area to be able to show you how this stuff is going to come off. Some areas go real slow, some areas go real fast. Typically, start to finish, this part of the process for me, if you go around and you clean up the edges real good and all that stuff, takes about 2 hours. But if it takes you 4 hours or 8 hours, it doesn't matter. It's just, you got to get this stuff off so we can, move forward. I usually start, this is the hump pocket. You can see all this fat right here. I usually start above the hump pocket, work down to it, and then along it. And this is kind of getting off topic, but it's also kind of neat. You start getting into this area here, working the hump down. If you've got a really well-skinned hide, like the hide I was showing you earlier that my friends and I were able to harvest and process the animal, you can literally start along the spine and roll an entire sheet. You can take this whole side of the hide off in essentially one sheet. And the big, I don't know if the camera's going to pick it up, but the remainder of this big sheet right here is up over the entire rib cage. It'll go almost all the way to the upper part of the belly and not too far in from the hump and the front leg. And there's some great old photographs. One in particular y'all are probably familiar with, of an Arapaho family taken in the late 1860s by William Sewell, that shows this teepee pole as a meat drying rack in front of a hide lodge with the family sitting out in front of it. It's a great picture if you like hide lodges. I'm sure you know the picture. There's this huge, sort of warped, mangled sheet of something hanging over this teepee pole, and I'm like 99% convinced it's one of these big pieces of meat that they're drying for, to eat later. There again, if it's skinned well, this sheet of meat actually comes off with the hide. It doesn't stay with the carcass of the animal. And if you're not scoring the hide up and you're not breaking through all this connective tissue, membranes, meat, etc., it will literally come off in one giant piece. It's a lot easier to flesh that way too, but there again, with this hide, that's not what we've got. So we'll just do the best we can with what we've got. Okay, I'm going to start in. There again, it's about as archaic a function as there could possibly be. There's no art to it or anything. It's just using it until you get good at it and stick with it. 99% of the time when I'm using one of these, I've got my free hand pushing against the hide. That instantly takes up slack in the hide. That's also a big advantage of working these in a frame. You don't have the ability to do this as easily working them on the ground, but like I said, I paid my dues for probably a dozen hides or so working them on the ground and don't intend to go back to it. You can see I'm getting in behind the membrane, not cutting the hide, not scraping the hide. I'm literally adzing the hide, the membrane and connective tissue away from the hide. That is the actual surface of the hide that we're going to be tanning right there. Something else too, this goes back to the hide over here with the blue lines on it. You just pan back to that real quick. When you're fleshing a hide, all the areas we talked about being the trouble areas inside of the blue lines. One of the reasons they're trouble areas, one of the big reasons, they're also the hardest to flesh. The membrane along the spine literally seems to me to grow out of the hide, not lay on top of it. So it's, it depends a lot on the age of the animal, but sometimes like on an older animal, most of these are heifers. The hides that I'm working with now, female buffalo that have never calved, they're typically under 3 years old. But some of the hides I used to tan, at the processing plant they called cull cows, and they were literally, you know, they were huge hides, but they were 20 years old, and they'd be